"What do you think you're doing in my room?" Mark Hawthorne's voice shattered the stillness like a hammer hitting glass. He stood in the master bedroom doorway, his tall frame rigid with anger, his stern face etched with suspicion. Rain dripped from his coat, but he seemed not to notice, his entire focus on the woman on the bed, Maya Williams. She bolted upright from the mattress, her heart pounding, her eyes wide with fear rather than guilt. The twins, Ethan and Elise, were curled up on either side of her, finally asleep, their faces soft and their breaths even. A teddy bear in Ethan's arms rose and fell with his gentle breathing. "I can explain," Maya said softly, careful not to wake the boys, her hands held up slightly in a gesture of calm. They were terrified. Elise was crying. Ethan had a nosebleed. Mark didn't let her finish. His palm came down fast, a deafening slap echoing through the room. Maya reeled back, gasping, a hand flying to her face. She didn't scream, didn't even utter a word. Her eyes simply locked onto his, more stunned by the blow than by the rage. "I don't care what your reason is," Mark growled. "Get out of my house right now." She stood there for a moment, her hand still pressed to her cheek, trying to steady her breathing. Her voice, when it came, was so soft it was almost a whisper. "The children begged me not to leave. I stayed because they finally calmed down, they finally felt safe. I said, 'Get out.' That woman drugged the children." Gloria, the housekeeper's accusation echoed through the elegant hallway of the Whitmore mansion as jarringly as a gunshot. "Mr. James, how could two children who were causing trouble all night be sleeping like angels now? She's doing something very suspicious to them." Maya Williams, 28, stood motionless in the marble-floored hall. She watched as the 60-year-old housekeeper gesticulated dramatically in front of her boss. The accusation didn't surprise her. In fact, she had expected it 3 weeks ago, when she accepted the job of looking after 4-year-old twins who had driven 14 nannies to quit in 6 months. Mark Whitmore, a real estate mogul and grieving widower, looked back and forth between Gloria, his housekeeper of 15 years, and the young, dark-skinned Nanny. She had transformed his home from a place of incessant screams into a peaceful oasis. For the first time since his wife's death, his children had slept for 8 solid hours a night. "Gloria, those are very serious accusations," he mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. "Serious, Mr. Whitmore." Gloria spat the words like poison. This woman came from the Detroit suburbs without any decent background. And suddenly, children who constantly screamed from nightmares are sleeping like babies. Something is definitely wrong. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes briefly meeting Mark's. There was something in that look. It wasn't just gratitude for the peace she had brought to his home, but also a curious question. Why would a woman with such high education and deep knowledge of child development accept a job that 6 other nannies had fled from in tears? "If you are determined to investigate my methods," Maya said with a calmness that made Gloria pause, "I suggest we install cameras in the children's room. That way, everyone can see exactly what happened at night." The suggestion astonished everyone. James frowned, observing the nanny's calm expression. There was something about Maya that didn't fit a simple childcare provider. Over the past few days, he had noticed unusual things. She spoke 3 languages fluently, cited neurological studies on children with the precision of a scholar, and had a demeanor that made even important guests listen to her opinions about the children. 3 weeks ago, when the placement agency called, he had been desperate. 14 nannies had quit in just 2 months. Elise and Ethan, traumatized by their mother's sudden death, spent nights screaming, crying, and refusing to sleep. The entire house was consumed by exhaustion. Gloria always openly expressed her opposition to people like that, taking care of children in distinguished families. Yet, when Maya arrived that first afternoon, everything changed instantly. The twins, who were usually hostile toward strangers, approached her with curiosity. And on the very first night, a miracle happened. They slept for 6 consecutive hours. "Cameras?" Gloria stammered, clearly not expecting this answer. Well, that's not necessary if she just… Actually, Maya interrupted, pulling her phone from her pocket. I've recorded some of our nightly routines to document the girls' progress. Would you like to see? An absolute silence fell. James noticed a subtle shift in Gloria's face, from defiance to near panic. Maya glanced down at the two children, who were still in a deep, peaceful sleep, as if the ghosts that haunted them had finally vanished. She bent down gently, kissed Elise's forehead, then Ethan's. Without a word, without any fanfare, she got out of bed, holding her shoes in her hand, and walked past Mark without saying another word. He didn't stop her, nor did he apologize. Maya walked down the stairs, the red mark on her cheek, telling the whole story. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving only a light drizzle. She stepped out into the grey afternoon, pulled her coat tight, and began to walk toward the gate. Upstairs, Mark still stood in the master bedroom, his breathing heavy. He looked back at the bed, his jaw clenched. Suddenly, something startled him, the silence. He stepped closer. Ethan's forehead was smooth, no tossing and turning, no whispers, no cold sweat. Elise was sucking her thumb, but her other hand rested on the blanket, completely relaxed. They were asleep. Not drugged, not exhausted from crying, simply asleep. A lump formed in his throat. 14 nannies, therapists, doctors, hours of screaming, struggling, and worry. And then Maya, this quiet stranger, had done what no one else could. He had hit her. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. The shame seeped into his chest like ink into water. On the nightstand, there was a neatly folded piece of paper. He opened it. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the people who will. There was no signature. He read it twice. His reflection in the nearby mirror showed a man hardened by grief, drowning in his own control and suffocating in his own silence. The next day, as he walked toward the kitchen, he heard voices and stopped. He peeked through the door and saw Maya crying on the floor, still holding a kettle. She hadn't abandoned the children, and in front of her were his 2 kids, looking at her with concern. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Maya stammered. "I just twisted my ankle by accident," Maya said. "Oh, come on," Mark said as he opened the door and walked in. "Let me see." He helped her stand up and looked at her ankle. The wound was swollen but not too serious. "You should ice it," Mark said, "and rest. You don't need to come in tomorrow. Take a whole week off." "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore," Maya said, wiping her tears. "I won't bother you anymore." "Don't call me Mr. Whitmore. Call me Mark," he said with a smile. "And don't worry about taking time off. We will pay you double for next week." "Really?" Maya asked in surprise. "Of course," Mark said. "Now go take care of yourself." Mark watched Maya leave the kitchen before turning back to his children. He hugged both of them and told them how proud he was of them. He explained to them that it was his fault she was hurt, and he would talk to her later. They spent the rest of the day playing games together and eating takeout until bedtime. Mark tucked them in and kissed them goodnight before leaving the room. As Mark left the room, he met the housekeeper, Gloria, who was waiting at the door. "Mr. Whitmore, you need to understand what's happening here," she insisted, walking to the window. "This woman appeared out of nowhere with no clear background and suddenly has a magical power over the children. Please, snap out of it." "Gloria, perhaps you are overreacting. It's clear that the children are being manipulated," the housekeeper interrupted, her voice rising. "You don't see it because you are too desperate, but I know her type. They come with a humble facade, perform temporary miracles, and then start demanding favors. First a raise, then expensive gifts for her family, and finally, access to your accounts." Mark cut her off, his voice cold. "Gloria, I appreciate your dedication, but I will decide who takes care of my children. I see them happy and sleeping well for the first time. For me, that is enough." Gloria's words, though dismissed, planted a seed of doubt in Mark's heart. He trusted that Maya was good to the children, but a father's fear won out. He needed proof, the truth, to reassure himself. After everyone was sound asleep, Mark secretly went into his study. He opened his laptop, accessed a website, and ordered a sophisticated hidden camera. This action was a defense. He wanted to protect his children, be sure they were receiving the best care, and have proof to deal with Gloria once and for all. The next morning, as Mark came downstairs, he was astonished to find Maya already in the kitchen. She was preparing breakfast, moving carefully as if the swollen ankle from the night before had never happened. His offer for her to rest seemed to have been completely ignored. Seeing him, she simply gave a gentle smile and said, "Good morning, Mr. Jenkins. The boys are already awake." Her unwavering but professional attitude made Mark reconsider. Perhaps she was right. This house needed a fundamental change, and Maya was the person who could help him do that. That morning, Mark, Maya, and the children began establishing new rules for the house. They weren't rigid rules but simple commitments: to listen, to forgive, and to be present. Maya explained to the children that listening wasn't just about using their ears, but also using their hearts to understand one another. She taught them how to apologize and forgive, saying it was the way to heal emotional wounds. Most importantly, she emphasized presence, truly spending time together without being distracted by work or old fears. Inspired by Maya, Mark began to act like a real father. He no longer rushed off after breakfast, but stayed to play with his children. He and Ruby and Rose drew pictures, put together puzzles, and he told them the same adventure stories that his wife used to tell. Children's laughter slowly returned to the house, replacing the screaming and crying. Mark realized that what his children needed wasn't a perfect house, but a real father and a complete family, even without their mother there. That evening, Mark was at his office finishing up some work. He opened the camera app on his phone to check on the children. He saw Maya patiently singing a soft lullaby before quietly leaving the room, leaving behind a gentle glow from the nightlight. The sight warmed Mark's heart. But a few minutes later, the door creaked open again. The housekeeper, Gloria, snuck in like a ghost, moving silently. She approached Ethan's bed. The boy was fast asleep. Gloria looked at him with a cold stare, devoid of any affection. She reached out, her bony fingers gripping Ethan's chin, squeezing it slightly, causing the boy to frown in his sleep and stir slightly. She leaned in close, almost putting her lips to his ear. Her voice was a venomous whisper. "You think you can be happy? Your mother is dead. Your father is about to forget her because of that whore. You'll never have a family again. Remember this pain. It's the only thing you have." Ethan sobbed unconsciously. A hot tear rolled down his cheek. The boy curled up, his sleep becoming restless. Gloria released him, a monstrous smirk on her face. She turned toward Elise's bed, intending to do the same thing. But just then, a soft sound in the hallway startled her, and she hurried out of the room. Mark's face went from warm to stunned, then froze in a state of absolute fury. He clenched his phone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He understood now. His children's pain didn't just come from the past. It was being deepened every day by the very person he had trusted. The horrific truth left Mark unable to act immediately. His rage flared, but he suppressed it, turning it into a cold determination. He saved the video, every single second of it, as irrefutable evidence. He knew he had to handle this decisively, not with anger but with a terrifying calmness. The next morning, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Mark came downstairs at his usual time, his face devoid of emotion. He ate breakfast with his children, gently kissing their foreheads before calling Gloria into his study. "You wanted to see me, boss?" Gloria asked, her voice as calm as ever. She walked in and closed the door, her expression annoyed at having to face a private conversation. Mark didn't answer. He simply walked to his desk, took out his phone, and placed it on the table. "Gloria, watch this." She frowned in confusion, but as the video began to play, her face immediately changed. The light from the phone screen illuminated her pale face, her eyes shrinking as she watched herself, a ghost sneaking into the children's bedroom. She saw her bony hand gripping Ethan's chin, saw her monstrous smile as she whispered vicious words into the boy's ear. "No, it's not possible," Gloria stammered, taking a step back, her hands trembling. She tried to say something to justify herself, but no words came out. Mark looked straight into her eyes, his voice as cold as ice. "You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave my house. I will keep this video. And consider yourself lucky, Gloria, that I am not sending it to the police." His words were not just a command, but a verdict. It extinguished any hope of resistance she had. Gloria stood there, like a statue, completely broken by the undeniable evidence. 3 weeks after Gloria's dismissal, the house was no longer filled with silence but hummed with life. Breakfasts were louder, bath times were messier, and the children, once withdrawn and fragile, began to blossom like wildflowers emerging from winter. The rules on the refrigerator were slightly worn at the edges from little fingers eagerly pointing to them every day. And Mark, the stoic and aloof patriarch, found himself folding tiny socks and clumsily learning how to braid hair. The house had found its peaceful rhythm again. The laughter of Ethan and Elise now echoed through the halls, no longer stifled by fear. But in the shadows, a seed of hatred had been planted. Gloria, the fired housekeeper, did not accept defeat quietly. For her, being dismissed was not just losing a job, it was a deep humiliation. A fire of envy and bitterness raged within her, aimed directly at Maya, the woman who had replaced her, won the trust of her boss and the love of the children. Humiliated and fueled by resentment, Gloria decided to seek revenge. She knew how to ignite a larger fire rather than confronting them directly. Gloria sought out the Hollingsworth family. James and Eleanor Hollingsworth were consumed by grief and helplessness. They had just lost a lawsuit, losing their only chance to protect their grandchildren from the man they believed was indirectly responsible for their daughter's death. They were at their most vulnerable, and Gloria knew exactly that. "I shouldn't be saying this," Gloria began with a feigned reluctance, "but my conscience won't allow me to stay silent. I'm worried about the boys." Sitting in the Hollingsworths' luxurious living room, she painted a distorted and malicious picture. She spoke of Maya seducing Mark, and of the times she saw Maya staying in his bedroom too late. She hinted at a gold digger with no background who was trying to seize the Hawthorne fortune. "She sleeps on the bed with the boss and the boys," Gloria said, choosing her words carefully to evoke the most repulsive image. "They call it comfort, but I find it indecent. A strange woman in a widower's bedroom with the children. It's just not right." For Eleanor, who valued rules and social standing, Gloria's words were like adding fuel to the fire. They would sue again for Mark's emotional instability. They would sue because he had introduced an educational and moral hazard, damaging the innocence of her grandchildren. A second lawsuit was filed with the court, accusing Mark of being an unfit father and demanding immediate custody. One Friday night, after the kids were sound asleep, Maya wandered through the halls. She often did this when old memories surfaced, seeking a quiet place to breathe. But tonight, something felt off. The library door was ajar, a thin sliver of light spilling out. She gently pushed it open. Mark was sitting at his desk, his shoulders slumped, one hand holding his phone, the other a half-empty glass of whiskey. He didn't notice her at first. "Bad news?" Maya asked softly. He started, then looked up. "Maya, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you. You've had 3 bourbons. Something must be wrong." He put the glass down, clearing his throat. "Just reading an email." She waited. Finally, he turned the laptop screen toward her. The subject line read, "Notice of custody hearing." Maya blinked. "A custody hearing for the boys." He nodded, his jaw clenched. "Rebecca's parents, the Hollingsworths, have filed for temporary guardianship, claiming I'm unfit." "On what grounds?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Spite, neglect, emotional instability, an incident of domestic violence." Maya's face darkened. "They found out what happened." "About me. Apparently," he mumbled. "They've been watching. waiting. Now that the boys are starting to open up, now that we finally have some stability, they want to rip it away. She sat down across from him. Do you want me to go to court and testify about the changes I've seen, what I've been documenting? Mark hesitated. I don't know if that would help or make things worse. They'll argue that your presence proves I can't be a father on my own. Then maybe we shouldn't fight alone, she said with certainty. Maybe we should show them what a real family looks like and what real healing requires. His eyes met hers. You would do that? Stand up in court after everything? I'll do it for them, Maya said. For Ethan and Elise. He let out a breath, the tension in his body easing slightly. Do you really think I can win? She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkness where the boys' nightlight was still glowing faintly in the distance. You won't win if you walk in there as the man who slapped me. But you will win if you walk in as the man who apologized, who changed, who showed up. He nodded slowly. Then I'll show up. The next morning, the house was buzzing with a quiet urgency. Maya spent time reviewing her journal, documenting the boys' routines, emotional progress, and their interactions with their father. She gathered art projects, took pictures of the rules on the refrigerator, and printed a photo that Ethan had drawn, the four of them under a rainbow, holding hands. No one told him to do it. He just drew what felt right. Meanwhile, Mark called his lawyer and arranged an emergency meeting. This time, his instructions were not about reputation management or asset protection. They were about protecting the two boys who had already lost so much. At lunchtime, Maya sat with the two children under the oak tree in the backyard. Do we have to go live with the Hollingsworths? Elise asked abruptly. Why would you ask that? Maya froze. I heard Dad on the phone, Ethan said. They don't like him. Maya put her plate aside. Kids, no one can take you away, and I'm not going anywhere, either. But the Hollingsworths are rich, Ethan whispered. They said on the phone that Dad chose the wrong person, that you're not family. Maya leaned closer, gently lifting Elise's chin. Listen to me. Family isn't made up of the same skin color or the same last name. It's made up of people who stay, people who fight for you when things get tough. And I'm here. That makes me family. Elise wrapped her arms around her, small and warm. Then you have to win, the boy mumbled. Maya looked up at the house, where Mark was standing behind the window, watching them. He gave a slight nod. They were ready to fight. That evening, Maya sat at the guest room desk, typing her statement for the court. It wasn't flowery or formal, it was heartfelt. She described the boys' anxiety when she first arrived, the nights of screaming, the empty silence, and how, over time, they began to laugh again, sleep again, and trust again. At the end of the page, she wrote, healing doesn't happen smoothly, it's messy, but in that home, I watched two little boys begin to mend themselves, not because of money, not because of blood, but because someone chose to stay. She printed it out, placed it in a folder, and left it on Mark's desk. As she turned away, she glanced back at the piece of paper he had kept, her handwriting, still taped to the edge of a picture frame. If you can't stay for them, at least don't push away the people who will. She smiled, because now, finally, no one was being pushed away, and everyone was staying. The courtroom was cold, not because of the temperature, but because of the suffocating silence. The dark oak-paneled walls seemed to absorb every sound, leaving behind an atmosphere thick with animosity. Mark sat up straight, his shoulders rigid as stone, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his jawline were prominent. Beside him, Maya was a statue of composure, but under the table, her fingers were locked together, white at the knuckles. Opposite them was a wall of ice. Mr. and Mrs. Hollingsworth sat there, their grief for their daughter frozen into rage and steely determination. Next to them, their lawyer, Mr. Pierce, stood up, his appearance polished but his eyes sharp and cold. Your Honor, he began, his smooth voice echoing through the room. We are here today not to debate grief, but to address an alarming truth. Mr. Mark Hawthorne, while claiming to be a loving father, has engaged in irresponsible behavior, placing the safety and moral development of his own children in jeopardy. Mark let out a small hiss, but his lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, gesturing for him to stay silent. Present Exhibit A, Lavier Pierce signaled. On a large screen, a series of photos appeared. They were taken furtively, from hidden angles, in weak lighting, making everything seem shady. The first showed Maya sitting on the edge of Mark's bed, both of them talking. The second showed her holding a sobbing Elise, with Mark standing just behind, his hand on her shoulder. The last, the blurriest, showed only two figures in a hallway late at night. These images, Lawyer Pierce said, his voice full of innuendo, show a blurred boundary. The boundary between boss and employee, between a grieving widower and a young woman brought into his home. An inappropriate intimacy taking place right in front of the children. That's a blatant misrepresentation. Mark couldn't hold back any longer, half rising from his seat. My children have nightmares. She was just helping them. Order. Judge Templeton banged his gavel, his eyes stern. Mr. Hawthorne, please sit down. One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt. As Mark was forced to sit down, his face red with helplessness, Lawyer Pierce called his first witness. The court calls Mrs. Gloria Fuentes. The former housekeeper stepped up, wearing the face of a martyr. She placed her hand on the Bible, swearing to tell the truth. Mrs. Fuentes, Lawyer Pierce began in a gentle voice. You worked for the Hawthorne family for nearly 10 years. Can you describe the changes in the home after Miss Maya Williams arrived? Gloria took a long breath, as if recalling painful memories. Everything was different. At first, I thought she was a good girl, but then I saw things that weren't right. The giggling after the children were asleep, the whispered conversations that lasted late into the night, the way she looked at the boss. She paused, glancing at Mark and Maya with fake pity, and then there were nights. I'm certain she didn't sleep in the guest room. In the morning, I'd find the sheets on the boss's bed unusually rumpled. More than one person had been there. A stunned murmur rippled through the room. Objection, Your Honor. Mark's lawyer shot to his feet. The witness is speculating. There is no evidence for these accusations. Judge, Lawyer Pierce immediately countered. The witness is merely describing what she observed. Taken together, these observations suggest a troubling pattern of behavior. Judge Templeton frowned, looking at Gloria. Did you personally see Miss Williams and Mr. Hawthorne in the same bed? Gloria hesitated, her face feigning embarrassment. No, sir, but all the signs were there. I was just worried for the boy's innocence. Though Gloria's testimony was full of holes, the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted in the minds of the judge and everyone present. It was now time for Mark and Maya to face the storm. After Gloria left the witness stand, leaving behind a toxic fog of suspicion, Lawyer Pierce turned, his sharp eyes fixed on Maya. The court calls Miss Maya Williams. A hush fell over the courtroom as Maya stood up. She held her head high, walking with a steady pace toward the witness stand, each step a silent assertion. As she sat down, she faced Lawyer Pierce directly, her face surprisingly calm. Miss Williams, Mr. Pierce began in a condescending tone. You came to work for Mr. Hawthorne as a nanny, is that correct? That's right, Maya replied, her voice clear and unwavering. So, can you explain why your role extended beyond those duties, delving into the personal life of your employer? Because my job wasn't just to care for Ethan and Elise physically, Maya said. My job was to care for their souls. A soul that had been deeply wounded. Lawyer Pierce smirked. A noble mission. But what qualifications do you have to do that? You have no degree. Where are you from, Miss Williams? What is your background? Don't you find that suspicious? My origins are irrelevant to my ability to care for these children. What's important is that I was there when they needed me, Maya responded. Oh, you were there, Mr. Pierce repeated with a sarcastic tone. You were in their bedroom, in their father's bedroom. Miss Fuentes testified that she heard giggling and whispered conversations late at night. How were you caring for their souls that way, Miss Williams? The only boundary I blurred was the boundary between fear and safety, Maya retorted, her voice hardening. The giggling she heard was the first time Ethan had laughed out loud in months. The whispered conversations were when Mr. Hawthorne and I discussed the children's progress, about how to help them overcome their pain when none of you were there to do it. Lawyer Pierce paused slightly, but quickly regained his offensive. Your presence proves one thing, Mr. Hawthorne cannot care for his children on his own. He must rely on a young, unvetted employee. That is not a stable environment. Who do you think you are in that family, Miss Williams? Instead of shrinking back, Maya sat up straighter. She turned to look directly at Judge Templeton, and then her eyes found Mark's. I know who I am, she said, her voice no longer defiant, but filled with a weighty certainty. I am the one who taught Elise how to tie her shoes. I am the one who sat in a closet for hours with Ethan. I am the one who cleaned up plates of thrown food and the one who held tiny bodies trembling from nightmares. Her words echoed in the silence of the courtroom. It wasn't just a self-defense, it was a declaration of love, of choice, and of the true meaning of the word family. Maya's statement still hung in the air, a weighty stillness that filled the courtroom. Judge Templeton looked at her intently, her usual stern expression replaced by a profound curiosity. She saw something far beyond a hired hand, defending herself. Lawyer Pierce, feeling the momentum slipping, decided to deliver a final blow, aiming for the most critical weakness. Those are very touching words, Miss Williams, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But love cannot replace expertise. These two children have gone through a trauma that even top professionals would struggle with. And you, an untrained person, on what basis do you make decisions about their mental health? Do you rely on instinct or Google? That humiliating question was the very door Maya needed. She looked directly at Judge Templeton, her voice calm but powerful. I did not rely on instinct, Your Honor. I relied on 8 years of intensive study and research in developmental psychology, with a specialization in childhood trauma treatment. An absolute silence. Even the rustling of papers stopped. Mark's head snapped around to look at her, his eyes wide, a mix of disbelief and astonishment on his face. What was he hearing? Lawyer Pierce let out a short, forced laugh. What a preposterous story. If you're a professional, why were you hiding? Why apply for a nanny position? Because that was the only way to perform the most effective therapy for Ethan and Elise's case, Maya replied, her voice now carrying the certainty of an academic. What the boys needed was not an hour-long session once a week in a strange office. It was a method called immersive therapy. They needed a constant healing presence, someone who could intervene the moment a crisis erupted, someone who became a safe, stable part of their living environment. She continued, speaking directly to Judge Templeton as if they were in a professional seminar. When a child is deeply traumatized, they build defensive walls. It is very difficult for an external therapist to break through, but a person they trust, someone who eats dinner with them, reads them stories, and faces the darkness with them at night, that person can reach the deepest corners of their soul. She turned to Lawyer Pierce, who was now speechless. You asked why I took this job. I will now tell you my motive. Maya's gaze was no longer on Mr. Pierce. It swept past the courtroom to land on Mark, who was staring at her, a jumble of emotions swirling in his eyes. Her silence was long, tense as a tightrope. My motive, she began, her voice trembling but clear, doesn't stem from a psychology textbook or a scientific study. It stems from blood. Blood, Judge Templeton repeated, her eyebrows furrowed. Please explain. Maya took a deep breath, feeling as though her chest would burst. She looked straight at Mark, her eyes filled with tears, a silent apology. The truth is, I'm not just a random psychologist who picked a case. I sought this family out. I sought him out. The entire courtroom held its breath. Mark froze in his seat, his brain struggling to process her words. Him? My full name is Maya Williams Hawthorne, she said, each word a hammer blow shattering the silence. And I am Mark's sister. The shock exploded in the courtroom. Gasps, incredulous whispers. The Hollingsworths looked at each other, astounded, but all that noise was muted in Mark's ears. He just stared at Maya, his world completely turned upside down. This woman, whom he had yelled at, suspected, and relied on, was his sister. It couldn't be. Maya continued, tears now streaming down her cheeks, her voice cracking with years of suppressed emotion. We were separated at a very young age, adopted by two different families. Our birth parents made us promise never to seek each other out, so that each of us could have a new, complete life, unburdened by the past. Her voice dropped to a painful whisper. When Rebecca passed away, when I read the news, when I saw him and the children so broken, that promise no longer mattered. My brother was in pain. My nieces and nephews were falling apart. I couldn't stand by and watch anymore. She looked directly at Mark, her eyes a plea for understanding. That's why I had to hide it. I couldn't just walk in and say, "Hi, I'm the sister you never knew." It would have been too much of a shock. So I chose the only way I could think of to become what he needed, a nanny, someone who could be there to heal the children without turning his whole world upside down. She turned to Judge Templeton, but her gaze remained on Mark. The fact that I kept my distance, endured his anger, his suspicion. It wasn't because I was afraid or had bad intentions. It was to protect our promise, and more than anything, to protect him from a truth that was too much to bear. I thought I could do it forever, just silently be there. But now, you have given me no other choice. The truth, in all its raw, tragic, and beautiful glory, was finally exposed. It explained everything: her deep understanding of their pain, her unconditional dedication to the children, and the conflicting distance she had always maintained with Mark. Mark sat motionless, his mind reeling. Fragmented memories rushed back. The way she comforted Elise, her endless patience with Ethan, even the way she sometimes looked at him, a look he had never been able to understand. Now, everything made sense. This woman wasn't just a stranger, she was family, the missing piece he never knew he had lost. The judge's gavel came down, but the sound seemed to echo from another world. For Mark, the entire courtroom had dissolved, leaving only him and the woman on the witness stand. The person he had never known his whole life, yet whose soul he had strangely recognized. His sister. They returned home in a heavy silence that was not suffocating. It was the silence of a seismic shift, as their minds tried to rearrange an entirely new reality. Ethan and Elise, oblivious to the storm that had just passed, happily greeted them at the door. That night, Maya still read them a story as usual, her voice even and warm, but Mark, leaning against the door, heard something different. He heard the love of an aunt, the protection of a family member. When the boys were fast asleep and the house was quiet, Mark found Maya in the living room. She was standing by the window, looking out at the night, her back small and lonely. His initial shock had passed, giving way to a wave of regret and sorrow. He walked over, his voice hoarse. "Maya." She turned, her eyes still teary. Mark began, but the words caught in his throat. He had yelled at her. He had doubted her. He had treated her like a mere employee while she carried the burden of a secret and a silent love. "I'm sorry," he finally managed to say, his voice breaking, "for everything, for being such a fool." Maya shook her head, a sad smile on her lips. "How could you have known? I didn't tell you. I understand, Mark. I forgave you a long time ago." That night became a long night of stories. They sat by the fireplace, the firelight dancing on their faces, filling in the gaps of 30 years apart. Maya told Mark about her childhood in a simple family that always felt like something was missing. She told him about the only photo of their birth parents she had hidden away, about why they had to send their 2 children away, a painful decision to give them a better future. "When I found you," she whispered, "I watched you from afar for years. I saw you graduate, Saw you get married, saw you happy with Rebecca. I was so happy for you, but it hurt so much. Missing my brother but not being able to name him, not being able to touch him. It was a constant hunger. Mark listened, his heart tight. He shared his own life, about the wonderful adoptive parents who gave him everything, but how he still always felt an unexplainable sense of displacement. I always felt like I was missing a piece, he confessed. There was always an unanswered question deep in my heart. Now I know who that piece is. They talked until the first rays of dawn filtered through the windows. Decades of distance were erased in a few hours. They were no longer boss and employee, no longer strangers. They were brother and sister. The next morning, as Maya was preparing breakfast for the children, Mark walked into the kitchen. The weariness of a sleepless night had been replaced by a clear resolve in his eyes. "Maya," he said, his voice serious, "as of today, you are no longer doing this job." Maya froze, the spoon in her hand suspended in midair. "Mark, No," he interrupted, walking closer to her. He looked her straight in the eyes, his gaze firm and full of affection. "You are not an employee. You are my family. You are my sister, and the children's aunt." He paused for a beat, a soft smile on his lips. "But I also know you won't sit still. So, from now on, you will be my personal assistant." Your official title: Executive Director of the Hawthorne Family Foundation. You will run everything with me, especially the charity projects we talked about. You will have your own office, decision-making power, and a position worthy of who you are. Maya stood silently, speechless with emotion. He wasn't just giving her a job, he was giving her a place, recognition, a home in the truest sense of the word. Tears welled up again, but this time they were tears of happiness and release. "Okay," she whispered. Mark smiled, a truly radiant smile for the first time in months. Just then, Ethan and Elise ran into the kitchen. "Aunt Maya, are you crying?" Elise asked worriedly. Maya knelt down, hugging both children. "No, sweetie, I'm just smiling." She kissed their foreheads, then looked up at Mark. In the bright morning light of the kitchen, there were no more secrets, no more misunderstandings. There were just four people, four pieces that had finally found each other. A family, not built from perfection, but from broken pieces mended together with love, forgiveness, and the courage to stay when things got tough. In the end, everyone stayed, and they had a complete family.